Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a review on this Musashi Golden Dragonfly Katana, and I'm going to do a destruction test, as you may be able to tell by the broken sword that is in front of you right now. Before I get into the meat of the review, though, there are some things that you should note about the sword, the disclosure part, if you will. And the gist is that, one, I reached out to Musashi and they sent this to me as a review sample. I asked for a review sample. They sent me two swords. This is the first of the swords to be reviewed, and I did a destruction test on it. Now, Musashi didn't require that I do a destruction test, but that is what I chose to do because it feels, one, weird to keep a sword of value, and two, I think maybe gives a little bit more info if I destroy it, and you can see maybe what it takes and all of that kind of stuff. The last bit to note is that I'm not really affiliated with Musashi, though they did send me this for free for the purpose of review. Additionally, I am not an expert in the way of martial arts. I'm no super ninja master of any kind. I'm just an enthusiast, and these are my opinions, so take what you hear with a grain of salt, because that's what you're going to hear is just my thoughts and ramblings. So anyway, let's move on with the show. Now, I'm not really going to talk about the history of Musashi, but what I can say is that for years I have seen inexpensive blades on Cult of Athena and a myriad of other distributors that have sold Musashi blades for as little as like $50. I've been fortunate enough to have actually a few Musashi blades over the course of the last few years, and some of them were the most inexpensive blades that you could get from them, and my general opinion is that for $50 you get quite a bit of blade. Now, this is like $160 or $150 blade, or was at one point, and I'm going to have to look at it through a slightly different lens. There are not really, honestly, a ton of good options for a fully functional kind of battle-ready or sword that you're safe to swing at things in a semi-stupid way for $150-ish. There's even less at $50, but nevertheless, my lens is going to be in the $150 range as I compare it to other things that are out there. Most notably, from my personal experience, the Ronin RK series blades were available at a similar price point. At least I think that's where they are now. But it's been a few years since I've handled one of those, and it'll be tough to recollect. In any regard, Musashi makes a myriad of different blades that kind of run the pantheon of cost. I see on their website that there are some from very inexpensive prices. There's more on Cult of Athena and other distributors, it seems, than just their website or Amazon. And then on their website, there's some that are over $1,000 or more. So they have a few different varieties, though I usually think of them as the more kind of budget conscious pieces. That doesn't mean that their more expensive offerings aren't worth it or good. I have no experience with them, but what I generally think of them for is this kind of sub $200 range, or honestly somebody that can give you a functional sword for $50. That's generally where I think of Musashi, and I think they excel at that and give you quite a good bargain for $50. But we'll see how well this $150 does when I guess start rambling about that part. Let's move on with the review. The first bit that I talk about is the kashra, the butt cap, the end, the pommel, this bit right here. And what I can tell you, I guess if I first just talk about the fitting set in general, this Golden Dragonfly theme, I think it really misses the mark in what it's trying to emulate. It's not great. The casting quality isn't good. The details are obscured. It's very muddy and gaudy, and for me, it's like the worst possible iteration of Fuchi Kashra. It's just not very good in terms of its aesthetic. Now, that's a personal thing. Maybe you think it's awesome, and if you do, great. But to me, I do not like the way it looks. If you're going to do an inexpensive theme and do it as muddy as it is, then just do plain stuff. Honestly, on the $50 sword that I recall having from Musashi, I liked the fittings better. They were simpler. They didn't have any kind of blah casting quality stuff on them, and I liked that kind of simple, pragmatic, quasi just simplistic, minimalistic look better on an inexpensive sword, because it costs a lot to really do good casting quality. At $150, you don't have the budget to really do a lot, and this I don't think really does that well. In any case, maybe you like it, and if you do, cool beans. There is a dragonfly on there, though it has, I don't know, it's a little cartoonish. It's not as crisp and clean and accurate as I suppose some other pieces are that cost much more money. As we move on from the kashra, actually, let's not move on. Let's talk a little bit more about it. One, even after destruction testing, it's still very secure. The transitions on it don't bite in. There is a little bit of bulge, a little bit of overlap on the Ito, but it's still on there actually pretty good, and nothing bit me as I was using it. There's no sharp edges. Again, for an inexpensive sword, there are sometimes very expensive swords that have bulges, overlaps, lips, or something that bite into your hands as you try to move this sword around. This doesn't have it. It's on there. It's still tight. So that much, I suppose, is good. Let's move on to the Ito. This Ito has been used, for $150. The diamonds are all over the place. They're not great. They're misshapen, and they're all over the place. But again, this is a very inexpensive sword, and what I will say is that the cotton Ito that is on here is actually tighter than some Ito that I've seen on much more expensive swords. It's not perfect. It still moves around a little bit, but even after destruction testing, even after using it for a little while, it hasn't really come loose, though it has started to fray in some spots. It also has taken some discoloration. That's, I suppose, par for the course for inexpensive Ito, but it's actually pretty comfy in the hand. I have no doubt that if you used it more, it would probably loosen up over time, but it would probably also gain oil and kind of sweat from your hands and maybe tighten up or harden up a little bit. In any case, it's actually held the test of time, and where kashiras often come off or Ito often loosens up, this hasn't had that problem. I like the waisted shape overall. The Ito is, for an inexpensive sword, honestly, I'm kind of impressed. I really like how the Ito feels in my hand. I like how the Ska feels in my hand. Overall, it was actually a very fun sword, a comfortable sword to use. It was easy to index. It's not kind of too ovoid shape. And also, I don't make out where the panels are. Now, this is for $150, not a full wrap of Samegao. The Samegao is this kind of white nodule stuff underneath here. It's made out of ray skin. It appears to be actual ray skin, and they are panels, at least that is what I would guess, that are kind of in here rather than a full wrap. And I don't make out where those panels are. It also appears to be alternating in terms of the Ito, so sometimes that is better, though it seems to me some people really like alternating Ito. That's the way it's supposed to be done if it's done well, and that if your kashira does come off, kind of prevents it from just falling off right away. But if your kashira comes off, you're kind of fucked anyway, and you need to have it rewrapped. So I don't personally, I understand on the battlefield kind of thing why it is advantageous, but in any case, if your kashira comes off and the knot comes undone, you seem to be fucked either way. So I don't put a whole lot of stake in if the Ito is alternating. I put more stake in if it is tight. But in any case, this appears to alternate. So there we go. Moving on to the Fuchi right here, I don't see an overlap. It's actually pretty well executed in terms of the Fuchi. Also, if I put this blade back in, you can see that the Fuchi as well as the Koiguchi line up reasonably well. All in all, it's a reasonably well executed blade right here. I do think that they're dull. My considerations, criticisms don't really change on the Fuchi, the Kashira, the Manuki, the Tsuba. All of them appear very muddy, and I don't like the way they look. But I'm talking about the transitions. It's on there. It's good. And from that side of things, I can't complain. The last bit of note on the Ska is in the process of testing, the Makugi actually broke on the bottom, and I haven't taken the handle off yet, but you may be able to hear that it's developed slight bit of rattle over this. Now, again, I hit it hard enough and enough to break the sword, so it's not necessarily crazy, but you can kind of hear the Ska rattle. That wasn't the case when I had it. It took a lot of effort before I heard any rattle inside the Ska here, but eventually it did develop a rattle. The next bit that I can note about the Ska is that it is very fine, but there are some cracks right up in here. They are really kind of small and tough to see, but they are there. Now, in looking at this, you might see this kind of giant crack thing looking right here. That's actually a knot, and it's not a crack. It's not a great place to put a knotted bit of wood, admittedly, but the cracks are actually up here towards the mune, and they are a little bit more subtle. The Fuchi is also right here. Honestly, granted, it was in a state of disarray, but it came off pretty well. The Tsuba. If we talk about the Tsuba, again, it's very simple, well, it's not very simple. It tries to be really elaborate, honestly, but I can make out a lot of casting imperfections and kind of lines and things like that, and it just looks muddy and bleh. It's just bleh to me. But that is a subjective thing, and Musashi has a variety of offerings, and if you don't like this one, then pick a different one. The Seppa along here also say Musashi, which is something that is interesting to see. You can kind of see that it says Musashi on it. I like that a little bit. It lets you, it's different anyway. It doesn't necessarily mesh with theme, but it is different in this line of $150 katana. The habaki are simple, kind of straightforward, what you see every day, brass habaki, nothing special. It's obviously on here pretty tight. This has been pushed on pretty good, and it I don't know, it does the job. It was tight even after kind of banging this around. It did not come off. The machis on the blade, if we talk about the Nakago, are off center. It's not great, but what you generally expect to see. Also, if I look at the Nakago, it says Steward Lee. I don't know why it says that. It also has an engraving and signature on here. But the Nakago actually has a little bit more detail than the average Nakago does. So from that side of things, it's not bad. I've seen $300, $400 Nakago that don't look as good as this. Honestly, the Hanwei Oni Katana, which is an $1,800 sword if you go by MSRP, or $1,100 if you go by Cult of Athena, has a less good-looking Nakago than this. So there we go. It's got some embellishments and a name that I don't necessarily know why is on there. But in any regard, there we go. There's the Nakago. It's a simple gloss black saya with a cool-looking sageo on there. I haven't untied it, as you can see. The shirodome are loose and kind of can come out a little bit if you pull on them, but they haven't come out because I haven't untied it. The gloss black is pretty well applied. The overall sanding seems quite smooth, and the blade actually held on pretty well right out of the box. It was easy to do noto with, easy to draw with. It's not the best. It has a construction that is less than traditional, where generally speaking we would have a different construction. Here it wouldn't just be all wood, there'd be a larger bit of horn around it with just some kind of small bits of wood that you would see. In any respect, for $150, it's pretty par for the course, and honestly good. It does the job anyway, where I can hold the sword, or could hold the sword for a time. It did what a saya was supposed to do, and was more than I'd expect for $150. Now, the blade was a Saguha Hamon. Is a Saguha Hamon. It's tough to see, and you really had to get it in the right light to even notice it. It has a very kind of blah polish at like 600 or 800 grit or something like that. It's not a mirror polish, but it didn't really accentuate the Hamon. There was not a lot to see in terms of the polish on the blade. The blade was very simple. It had a bohi, and it was of a geometry that was a little lighter, not necessarily supposed to be like a super custom tatami mat cutting blade, but kind of what I suppose the stereotypical conventional idea of a blade would be. In any respect, it was very pragmatic, very simple. The website said that it was 1060, which I think is interesting, and I will note and talk on a little bit later, because 1060 has proven to be a pretty resilient steel. This was not terribly resilient, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Actually, I suppose I can move on to the dynamic side of things, and unfortunately, when I tested this sword, I thought I had taken the measurements for the sword dynamics computer, and I had not. So I will put the specifications in terms of all of the measurements and things like that. I do have those, but I did not take the specifications necessary for the weapon dynamics computer, and now that it is cracked, it is really too late for me to do that effectively. So I can't give you the weapon dynamics computer, regrettably. Dynamically speaking, though, it was a very light, nimble sword. It was actually very comfortable in my hand. In terms of like using this for an Iaito, it was actually comfortable. Obviously, it's not an Iaito, it's sharp, but if you wanted to use it for Iaido, I should say, then you could. It was actually very light, very comfortable to move around. It was, yeah, that would be my observations. It felt whippy. I could control it in one hand, felt connected to the tip. It felt light, though. It didn't seem like it was going to be a really great hard chopper, because it seemed more on the nimble, kind of made for more lightweight stuff, if you would. And that was the impression that I got from it. Now, moving on to the cutting side of things. I did some water bottle chopping, not a ton, and then I moved on to pool noodles. It actually didn't do necessarily great on the pool noodles. It wasn't super sharp, but adequately sharp, I would suppose I'd say. When I did a single tatami mat cut, it did the job in terms of single mat cuts, but I found that I had to muscle through it a little bit. I could cut the tatami mat, but it felt like I had to kind of really throw the tip out there, which isn't uncommon for a lightweight blade. You're able to do that with less effort, and that was the requirement. I couldn't really let the blade do the work, though. I did have to really throw myself into it to get through. And as soon as I took it to a double mat, that's where I started running into trouble. As soon as I cut a too thick, two-layer tatami mat. Now, granted, these are used mats; they're pretty hard stuff. But basically the blade took a giant set when I was cutting that double mat, and I muscled through it. But the blade took a pretty significant bend, and then I could whack it on the side of the stand to straighten it out. After that, I continued to do some double mat cutting, and after the first set took place, it was really a lot of bending after that. Pretty much every really rough cut required some adjustment. It would bend really easy after that, which I find strange because, generally speaking, my experience with 1060 blades has been Ronin Katana. Now, they're not always differentially hardened, and that can have a huge impact on the resilience factor of a sword, but I've tested a lot of 1060 swords, and this one took a set pretty easy, and once it took a set, it was bend after bend after bend, really. Granted, I was escalating the targets. I started cutting rolled wet newspaper, I started cutting branches, I started doing a lot of dumb stuff with it, and it continued to bend. And now, as I moved through the targets, it did a good job cutting, honestly. For $150, it did fine. It didn't show to be as resilient as the Ronin Arake Katana that I tested earlier. That one, I recall, I could really just bang into stuff, and it did not take a bend as easily. In any respect, this one did last. Through all the things that you would normally expect to cut with a lightweight 1060 sword for $150, it did the job. Water bottles are fine, pool noodles are fine, single mats, even used mats, which is what I was testing, were fine. It wasn't until I started to do doubles that I really ran into trouble. And after that, I ran into a lot of trouble. It was bending back and forth. Now, I could bend it back and forth actually quite a bit, and it was a pretty resilient blade. It didn't just crack and break in half when I bent it. I really took a lot of banging. I started cutting basically like shaving cream cans and other dumb kind of rough stuff, beer cans, things like that, and it held up actually pretty well, though the blade did really start to deform. I didn't notice deformation, honestly, until I started cutting metal. That was really when blade deformation started to take place. And as I moved back to a tatami mat, you can really see that the next tatami mat that I cut after doing some initial water bottle tatami, shaving cream cans and other dumb targets and brush, it didn't cut the next bit of tatami as well. It took some edge roll, which I can't really see with my eye, but definitely the performance seemed to be impacted. It was much harder to cut the second time around. Now, when I went to go break the sword, basically I took it on sword contact. As soon as I did that, the edge deformed profoundly. It really went quickly. Took some the blade looked serrated basically after a very short time. Every whack into another sword, which was a T10 sword from Jayco Sword, began to deform the edge pretty significantly. And then once I deformed the edge, I bent it back and forth quite a bit, and it actually held up pretty well in that respect. But after a few good strokes on the mune, or basically turning the sword around and then whacking it on the spine, it opened up those cracks and the blade eventually broke. Now the grain structure in this, for those metallurgists out there, actually seems pretty good. It seems really, really tight, though I'm not a metallurgist. Hopefully what you see in the photos is going to help you more than my ramblings. In any respect, for $150, this is the part where I tell you if I think it's worth it or not. And for $150, that's not a huge ton of money, or $162 or somewhere in that ballpark. Honestly, this is a very lightweight, fun sword to move around. If you're doing light cutting or something to that effect, it seemed to do the job really quite well. I found it to be very comfortable to move around. I found the Ito to be very comfortable, and I found it to honestly be a great package for $150. Now, don't expect the world for $150. It's not as good as the fancy swords that I have behind me. It doesn't draw the same, it doesn't move the same, it doesn't cut the same, it doesn't do all of those things the same. But if you're on a budget and you're trying to study Japanese martial arts and you want something that is at least going to hold in the saya well and at least be, semi-comfortable to move around doing thousands of repetitions, and an Ito that isn't loose out of the box and going to chew up your hands, it meets all of those qualifications. And I was, for $150, really expecting something very shitty. This was not shitty. It did all of the things that I would hope it would do reasonably well. It did them, not as good as a custom sword, not as great as you would hope. For $150 though, $150 on a custom sword doesn't buy you a habaki. It doesn't buy you somebody making this one part, let alone the entire blade. So for what you pay, I think it's actually a pretty good deal, a functional tool to kind of start your journey in learning. But be aware, if you're going to do hard cuts, if you're going to push yourself, if you're going to have bad cuts, it's going to deform pretty quickly. So for Iaido, I don't necessarily think it's bad for putting water bottles, or basically I would just say set your expectations at bendable and a tool that you're okay with losing, which realistically for $150 should be your expectation. You shouldn't expect a world for that, and I think for what this gives you, it's actually a pretty good value. Though I would just say be cognizant of the fact that it is not a super durable sword and isn't going to cut through tanks or anything like that. In any respect, for $150, I think it's not a bad deal, and I hope that the information I've provided has given you some information to make that decision for yourself. That is pretty much all I have for you. I hope it's been helpful. I'm sorry I didn't measure this stuff and wasn't able to provide the weapon dynamics computer. I will endeavor to be less sucky in future reviews, but that is all I have for you. As always, cheers and thank you for watching.